Welcome to the Gene Food Podcast. I'm your host, John O'Connor. Hey everybody, today we have a really exciting episode for you. We have an integrative cardiologist by the name of Dr. Joel Kahn, who you've probably heard of. Dr. Kahn has gained quite a bit of notoriety in the nutrition and medical world as somebody who's been featured on documentaries like What the Health. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast. He's been on The Doctor several times. He writes for Mind Body Green. He's really one of the leading commentators on integrative cardiology and how to use nutrition as a means for staving off heart disease and helping people live better and healthier lives. Of course, if you are familiar with Dr. Kahn's work, you know that he is an advocate of plant-based diets, and we get into a lot of that today. We talked to Dr. Kahn about a whole host of different things. It was a great episode. There were some technical parts that I think some of our audience will really like, and then we also got into some fun stuff like lectins and the YouTube culture for veganism, vegan bodybuilding, and some of the new vegan documentaries that are coming out and when we can expect those documentaries to come out. I also want to say to the audience prior to the episode beginning that a lot of doctors who have gained fame in the medical and nutrition world, they tend to leave their clinical practices behind. And Dr. Kahn is actually just the opposite. We come from the same community in Metro Detroit, and he's somebody who not only is known and respected nationally as an advocate of plant-based diets, but he's very well respected and very well liked in his local community, which I think speaks volumes. And a fun fact, Dr. Kahn was actually one of the highest rated cardiology fellows ever at the University of Michigan Medical School. He's the real deal. He's a lot of fun. We're really excited to have him on the show. And here's the episode. Okay, so Dr. Kahn, so you are here. So you're here for what's the expo?
It's the Plant World Expo. Or Plant-Based World Expo. It's the first time that some entrepreneurs, a whole lot of vendors, a CME program are trying to do, and I'll say it, kind of like Paleo FX does in Austin.
Okay.
Get a large group of people, get an energy, this is probably more academic because I was at Paleo FX a couple months ago, if you don't know. It's people that are in the paleo movement, love each other enough for 2-3 days, they can get along and they have vendors. And so the plant world has so much energy, but we don't have the best marketing and sex appeal. So this is an attempt to kind of merge all that. And I gave a talk this morning and got some other sordid activities. There's people here from all over the world. It's pretty cool.
So what did you talk about this morning?
Yeah, I give a talk about the future of cardiology is nutrition intervention. And I am trained and practiced for 30 years as a interventional cardiologist. I intervene with stents and balloons and, very aggressive, very mechanical, maybe as sexy as an open heart surgeon, maybe sexier, maybe they win the day for cracking open the chest and handling the heart and all the blood and guts. We like that stuff. I loved putting needles in people and blood was flowing and opening and healing and all. But, none of those modalities get to the root cause of where disease comes from, but they can be very therapeutic and important and even life-saving. So nutrition is one foundation. It's not the only foundation. Stress management, fitness, sleep, love, addressing genetics, addressing biotoxicity and all nowadays to really address root cause of cardiovascular disease. And that's what I focus on now in practice. So I'm intervening, I joke, with sprouts, not stents nowadays.
For sure. Is this, because I know when we've spoken in the past, it seems as though you have basically said that the plant-based movement has moved a little bit off of this whole Esselstyn protocol of zero sterol, zero oil, just very, very, very conservative on fats. Has that evolved? Like, what does that look like right now in terms of the protocol for this interventional nutritional cardiology?
Right. So if we talk about food industry, it clearly isn't focusing, the vast majority of it isn't focusing on, if you ate nothing but plants, you'd have generally a relatively low fat content to your calories. You could alter that by eating largely avocados and nuts and jack it up maybe to 30-40% of your calories. Again, leaving oil out, you can make yourself 90% of calories from fat with a plant-based diet and can mimic and actually create a keto plant-based diet if you want to really go jack those things up. The food industry isn't paying attention. Not that there aren't a few food delivery services and products out there that are whole food, plant-based, vegan, and either naturally or purposely low in calories from fat, absent oil. The food industry is just providing all kinds of things that look like what the public's used to, but no animals are involved. And some are, probably pretty healthy, and some are questionably probably not very healthy. But it's moving, it's growing, it's exploding. In the science, it's still staying mainly, not that there's a lot of new studies. In October 2018, New York University published formally a 100-patient randomized study of people with coronary artery disease on the whole food, plant-based, no added oil, Esselstyn-style approach versus an American Heart Association diet, which will be probably 20 to 30% of calories from fat, maybe 35%. And the endpoint was inflammation. The endpoint was specifically measuring high sensitivity C-reactive protein. There was a drop with the whole food plant-based diet of the Ornish Esselstyn style. There was a flat line in terms of what happened on the American Heart Association diet. Of course, if you did the study with a standard American Western jacked up processed diet, you'd see C-reactive protein go up. So as research comes out, it's largely staying true. New diabetic research in 2018 was whole food, plant-based, no added oil research. But it's not what the public is largely doing. It's not what the majority of patients are doing. But some should. The serious heart patient, the serious diabetic looking to reverse insulin resistance should probably omit oils from their diet.
And when you're looking at a blood panel, I mean, I've had blood work done with you, very advanced panel. You've looked at some genetic markers, EPA, DHA. What is your take on sterile absorption, specifically like cytosterol levels, these different demonstrable, these different sterile absorption in terms of synthesis and absorption? Do you pay attention to that in terms of your patients? Like you see like elevated cytosterol, do you think, oh my God, this is dangerous? Or do you tend to just say, hey, you know what? Like, I don't care if you have a fairly elevated cytosterol count.
Yeah. So, you can only, react to what you measure. And of those clinicians, cardiologists that are doing advanced blood work, and I'll just say there's a cost factor to the patient potentially of doing advanced blood work, depending on how they're reimbursed. There is the complexity of understanding the reports, and there's a time factor trying to explain it to the patients. And finally, there are certain advanced tests that there just isn't any remedy for. If I find out that you have a genetic marker called 9p21 homozygous, I can tell you your risk of developing coronary disease on a genetic basis is higher than if you didn't get that gene, but I can't do anything specifically about it. So the issue of getting advanced labs or not is difficult. The two providers in my field of heart disease, Boston Heart and Cleveland Heart Labs, are overlap a lot, but your question, only Boston Heart provides that marker. I think Health Diagnostic Labs, I believe I gave the right name to the lab because it's changed, does it too. So I predominantly use Cleveland Heart Labs. I'm familiar certainly with what you're talking about. Theoretically, if you can identify that somebody is, quote, a hyper absorber of sterols versus another person who is a hyper producer of cholesterol, and then there are people that have both aspects, but it might allow you to say, I'm going to put you on either oat bran rich in beta glucan that might slow down absorption of cholesterol if you're a hyperabsorber, or put you on a pharmacologic drug, ezetimibe, Zetia, that inhibits a receptor called the Niemann-Pick1 receptor that's involved in reabsorbing in your small intestine cholesterol, and the hyperproducer to give a statin to, or you use a natural product like bergamot that has a statin-like effect, or berberine that may have a statin-like effect. That is a great concept, but it hasn't been studied.
Right.
Well, are we going to improve patient outcome to classify people, hyperabsorber, hyperproducer, or a mixture, and tailor their therapy or their diet to that measure? So I don't know if I'm missing out by not adding that to my panel. I'd have to send blood to two different labs, and it just gets complex, very honestly.
No, I hear that. So that's what you think when you see the Esselstyn diet. He clearly has a view that there is some problem with sterile absorption for his really, truly sick patients. And that's why he's saying, like, hey, it's not only animal protein, but it's also like, avocado, nuts, and seeds. I mean, he cuts out a ton of food. It's a very restrictive diet.
Well, it's really those three. And I did talk about that this morning. There are a couple pioneers in the nutrition heart world that are not well known. One is Walter Kempner, MD, who developed the Duke rice diet, which in its day, the 70s and the 80s, Hollywood stars would go to Duke and spend 2-3 weeks eating white rice, sugar, fruit, scraps of chicken, a very low-fat diet that nobody would call attractive or reasonable nowadays. But he published all kinds of data: weight loss, reversal of diabetes, reversal of diabetic eye disease, reversal of enlarged hearts, reversal of kidney disease. Insane data that's actually respected but never followed anymore. He omitted avocados, olives, and nuts, and he was followed by a internist in Los Angeles in the late 40s, Lester Morrison, MD, whose name inscribes the auditorium at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, who developed a diet mimicking the deprivation of World War II. It's very interesting, and had a diet sheet for heart patients in 1948 in Los Angeles that specifically said, follow my diet, don't eat nuts, avocados, and olives. I believe that is why those studies that were done subsequently by Dr. Dean Ornish, by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, by Dr. Neil Barnard, followed that pattern, not that each one was tested. You can find a single study and find walnuts beneficial. Rarely will you find a study that walnuts are harmful. You can find studies that avocados are beneficial to your cholesterol and your artery function. I don't think you're going to be able to find a study that says they're harmful, but people have not gone back to ask, why are these diets omitting these whole foods that have lots of, nutrient-rich qualities? I think it's a mistake, and the one loud voice in the plant-based nutrition world is Dr. Joel Fuhrman, who will physically get almost violent about, what do you mean you're not adding in nuts, avocados, and walnuts and olives to your diet? You need those, quote, whole healthy fats to absorb your vitamin, fat-soluble components and such. So there is a little split there. Yet both diets seem to work very well, and it may be we're arguing about, the tip of a pin.
Sure. Yeah, Dr. Fuhrman's interesting. He's been one of these guys that's taken some flack in the plant-based world. I hear you with this sugar diet. That's kind of your mechanistic entry point to the defense of Ansel Keys. Because I was taking a look in preparation for the podcast. I saw some of your Joe Rogan notes, and you had on this sort of like, hey, I know Ansel Keys has taken all this crap, but hey, let's not totally throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, you're somebody who, and I think it's cool because it's such a echo chamber out there. People like Ansel Keys was paid off, and you're kind of like, hey, I'm not gonna totally dismiss Ansel Keys. He had some stuff that was valid about his work, and
specifically, it's a blog, but there's a blog out there you can read. You say echo chamber, it's interesting. Or if anybody remembers the game Operator, somebody whispers in somebody's ears and whispers in somebody's ear, and the thing at the end of 20 Kids isn't what it started with. That Gary Taubes, the famous Gary Taubes of Good Calories, Bad Calories, or Good Fats, Bad Fats, and other books, a journalist who has also partially changed his tune recently, but we can talk about that. He wrote in 2007 in his book, Ansel Keys, falsified data, picked 6 countries out of 22, hid the data that would have shown that diets higher in fat are not related to heart disease, and he cherry picked. Then another blogger, then another blogger, then another blogger. They actually, you can see they cut and paste into serial blogs to Nina Teicholz or Teicholz, however you want to say, 22 different bloggers, I think it was. And it just became widespread that a esteemed professor with 2 PhDs with 350 publications who has awards named after him all over the world became known as a cherry picking, hashtag fake news scientist. And it was the game, The Operator. And the problem is the first quote was patently wrong. We can go into that for a second if you really want to. It's a little bit of nutrition history, but it's been so distorted,
Well, I think what's interesting is just taking what we're trying to do with this podcast and with our site, was we're trying to take unique positions on some of these issues. And I feel like in my view, in the vegan community, there's a little bit of groupthink sometimes surrounding certain issues. If somebody's having problems on a vegan diet, and this is one of the things we wanted to get into, there's a lot of things, but you're limited on time, but it kind of segues nicely into ex-vegans. And I think to give equal time, you go to PaleoFX and you go to the plant-based conferences, to give equal time, you have paleo bloggers and the paleo community is like, all saturated fat is fine, going keto, nobody knows their LDL particle count, it's just kind of like keto, fat. the issue that I have with the vegan community is you have people like, it's sort of ridiculous, but these vloggers like Ravana, she's 6 years vegan. She gets caught eating one piece of fish and people attack her. And the reason why I have an issue with that is because I think there's good science out there that some people on a vegan diet are going to have a really difficult time getting DHA, getting the omega-3 fatty acids that they need to feel good. So what say you?
So let me just make one quick comment on paleo effects, keto, and I will remember we'll come back to Ravana. It is interesting. There is a scientist physician in Oakland, California, Ronald Krauss, Krauss, MD, okay, who earned the label from John McDougall, MD, a kind of wild and crazy plant-based doctor for 40 years, has written very popular New York Times best-selling books on starch and weight loss. Ronald Krauss was the senior author in a paper in 2010, but lead author was Patricia Siri Torino. There was a meta-analysis that was the first loud voice that we could not confirm that saturated fat related to increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Paper did not say, therefore, add back eggs, butter, and coconut oil, but it became a rallying point for the movement in the last decade that, eating 80% of your calories from fat might have a reasonable basis because it's not related to heart disease. Ronald Krauss was there, so Dr. McDougall gave him the title Dr. Lard. He said Dr. Krauss is Dr. Lard, and many people in the plant-based community have heard that. Dr. Krauss has had 3 stunning exceptions in the last 2 years. He did publish a paper that all LDL particle subtypes are atherogenic. There has been this idea that with a higher fat animal-based diet, you may shift small LDL particles to large LDL particles, that they're not atherogenic. He published a fairly definitive metabolic ward study, the kind of best human science you can do.
Sorry to interrupt. That's the Dave Feldman protocol, correct, that you're referring to, basically?
Dave would jack it up even further.
Okay.
Ronald Krauss didn't, this was a short-term human volunteer study done in the metabolic ward. Then Ronald Krauss published a paper in 2018 with Walter Willett, the head of nutrition at Harvard, and some other people, that he actually gave homage to Ansel Keys, who you'd think he would be in the group of cherry picking. Actually, Gary Taubes was one of the authors of the same article. They didn't capitulate, but they did say, until further data is out, diets that jack up saturated fat are of concern and shouldn't be recommended. They actually said that specifically about coconut oil. And just recently, you've seen the headlines, your audience, white meat raises cholesterol as much as red meat in a very carefully done study. And Ronald Krauss was the proponent and the senior author. So anyways, it may not be as easy to support the enthusiasm behind the keto diet, behind the carnivore diet, behind the paleo diet, in terms of, we have our shaman, our guru, Ronald Krauss, senior lipid expert in Oakland and part of Berkeley, California. He seems to be, moderating his stance a bit. To get to Ravana,
before you do though, because I want to make clear, I'm totally with you there. I think that if you listen to some of the lipid experts out there that are commenting, in addition to yourself, I mean, Tom Dayspring is one of them. Yeah. He's very clear in his opinion. Even Peter Attia, who is somebody who's much more in favor of high-fat diets in certain people, he's a student of lab work, and they say, look, you want to talk about lectins being inflammatory, which we'll get to in a minute. You know what's inflammatory? ApoB is inflammatory. LDL particles inflammatory. Nobody's here to say like, hey, Aaron, our head of research is totally in your camp. If you have elevated LDL particle, the best science, and it's overwhelming, tends to show that you are at a much higher risk for heart disease. The problem is that certain people with like PCSK9 variants, or people with very good genetics or very robust LDL receptor activity, they might not have elevated LDL particle on a high-fat diet. And that's something that I think has to be acknowledged more by the vegan community to gain more credibility and convert more hearts and minds, as opposed to just being like, well, low-fat, plant-based for everybody, right? Because some people don't have that reaction.
Right. I actually just, I think the vegan movement has been labeled a low-fat movement in the press, but I don't think that's completely representative. I think it's somewhat unfair. I mean, when you have serious heart disease and you research the literature, and you'll come across Nathan Pritikin and Dean Ornish, MD, and Caldwell Esselstyn, MD, you'll find diets they're whole food, plant-based without added nuts, avocados, and olives. So there'll be about 10 to 15% of calories from fat. Those are very therapeutic diets for a very small slice of actually patients.
Okay.
They're not necessarily, and if you read the books, Dr. Ornish will make it much more obvious than Dr. Esselstyn, but that they represent the end of a spectrum. And if you're a sick patient, you might choose the end of the spectrum. But for the general public, there are a lot of places along that ruler that you can pick that will still be very favorable. If you even go back to Ansel Keys, just to say it, the classic statement that he did is when he did the 7-country study, the percent of calories from fat in the diet in Crete was 40% of calories from fat. Not as high as some current, ketogenic diets,
That's
but
pretty high, though. Yeah, that's pretty high.
And in Finland, it was 40%. Where was the highest heart attack rate throughout Europe in 1968, 69? Finland. What had the lowest heart attack rate in the Mediterranean basin in 1968, 1969? Crete. They both had 40% of calories. It was almost all very pure monounsaturated fat,
Right.
olive oil calories in Crete. And it was butter and stuffed sausage in Finland. And they're very different, fatty acid constitution. So a plant-based diet that's either added fats or just naturally high in fat because of avocados, nuts, and olives and other foods like that is not in any way to be taken as an unhealthy vegan or plant-based diet.
Well, let me throw you a softball here for Ravana and tie it into Dr. Ornish, because Dr. Ornish is great. I love listening to his interviews. I love his work. I think it makes sense. He's got a lot of great data. I'm a fan of Dr. Ornish. Dr. Ornish, though, he has fish oil in his protocols.
Right.
So he's using fish oil. And if you look at his recipes, he has some dairy in his recipes as well. He does on his website.
That goes back, and he'll explain one part of it, but I'm explaining the other part, I think. His first research protocol was published in 1979. He was like 23 years old. And then he got it fully published in a very prominent journal called JAMA when he was 25 years old. So he's designing plant-based diets for serious heart patients at a time. There's no Whole Foods. There's no Thrive Market online. There's no plant-based algal oil capsules out there. His professor at Harvard, and he did his residency at Harvard, is Alexander Leith, MD, at the time the world expert on omega-3 and health, who advised him, you're going to be feeding these people, rice and beans and grains and greens and vegetables and fruits. Where they're getting their omega-3, I don't know if the content of flaxseed, chia seed, hemp seed, or even the availability of those natural sources of ALA were known, but he advised Dr. Ornish, put them on fish oil to be sure during this. One of the studies was 5 years long, that you're supporting their omega-3 content. And remembering, although there's some controversy now about fish-based omega-3 capsules as a health benefit or not in certain disease states. In the 80s, it was pretty well accepted, so there wasn't any pushback. You're absolutely right. 4 grams a day of omega-3 from fish oil were part of Ornish's lifestyle heart disease reversal trial and subsequently his prostate cancer study he did at UCSF. I don't know why. He did allow patients egg whites and non-fat dairy. I never asked him. Mm-hmm. I believe, again, if you look back and you say 1986, I'm going to feed you nothing but, lettuce and brown rice and some black beans and some apples and oranges. It gets to be a pretty bland diet. So It might have been a concern about protein, might have been a concern about calcium. It's probably not fair to call the research that we attribute to Ornish, of which really there's no brand new research. The last publication I know of was 2013, really a vegan program. It's a highly whole food plant-based program with some option for the patient to add some foods in.
Yeah, I've heard Dr. Ornish on Rich Roll, and he's kind of done a victory lap talking about his diet war days with, the Atkins diet and saying, look, it's kind of clear that
he debated them all. He debated Atkins. He debated Taubes. But, these are out there on YouTube, and it's just the nature of the world nowadays. There was like 2,000 views for a very contentious discussion. Now you get on Joe Rogan and, you get 10 million views. It's just, world has changed.
It's amazing. Why aren't these doctors talking more about arachidonic acid and this whole, because when I see this, I'm thinking, people say, well, I don't eat industrial meat. if you eat chicken, you eat industrial meat. I mean, chicken is it's like 96% of chicken is industrial. It's super high in it's fed corn. It's super high in arachidonic acid. It hits the immune system wrong. You know, some people are predisposed to converting more omega-6 into arachidonic acid to begin with. Like, to me, that's like the unassailable piece of veganism, like poultry. Yeah. It is inflammatory in the immune system. Not the fish as much though, but I think the
Well, and it's this exact same statistic for red meat. 96% of red meat bought in the United States is factory farm CAFO red meat. It's not grass fed. What's his name? Salatin, the wonderful proponent of a really beautiful husbandry of animals, which you should be congratulated and celebrated for. 96% is the worst of circumstances. And same thing, it's corn fed and it's pro-inflammatory, it's pro-insulinogenic, it's probably pro-atherogenic, pro-cancerogenic. So why aren't doctors talking arachidonic acid? Number one, if you took a survey of, you can go to a good institution. I don't think one doctor in 100 measures omega-3 blood levels. They are available. Quest Lab, I'm not involved. LabCorp, most labs will draw a patient's omega-3 and they'll break it down into, your EPA, your DHA, your arachidonic acid, various ratios. We're not taught a lot about it. I don't remember the last time I've encountered an article either in a good journal or even in a blog by a physician for a physician that, let me train you what this means and how it can help your patient care. In general, omega-3 supplementation seems to have fallen out of favor. There was this recent, what's called the VITAL study, where they used 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 and I think it was 2,000 milligrams of vitamin D, and neither of those arms at a prospective Harvard study proved to be very effective. I can't verify this, but the organization in Fort Lauderdale, Life Extension, which is a supplement company, but they've done research. They have a research institute, and they seem to at times have picked up trends before medicine has, like vitamin D might be an important supplement. CoQ10 might have some benefit, omega-3. They've always claimed if you design a study with less than 1.8 grams of omega-3 supplementation, you're not going to find benefit. It has to be from that level up. And so this large Harvard study was 1,000 milligrams. They wrote a article in their, lay journal that it would be predictable that at that dose, you're not going to see benefit. So there's that confusion. And when there's confusion, why are doctors going to even jump in and measure it and discuss it? It just seems to have fallen out of favor. In reality, I believe in, with all humility, you probably could go deep on omega-3 and arachidonic acid longer than I could. I can remember sitting in medical school, University of Michigan, 1982, and it was just when a guy named, I think, John Vale, I don't even know, I remember that, was researching arachidonic acid and thromboxane and prostaglandins, and we were just starting to learn. There was so much excitement. Just don't feel that energy more. But what I can share, and what I want to get back to, is I do draw omega-3 levels on my patients through one of these specialty labs. And the frequency of low blood levels, sometimes strikingly low blood levels, in the lab panel I get, 5.5% or greater of omega-3 fatty acids is the normal range. And then there's the breakdown into various other components. The number of people that it's 1.5%, 1.8%, 2%, I mean, 60, 70% lower than this bare minimum. There are experts out there that say optimal health is 8%, 12% omega-3 fatty acid levels for inflammation and maybe optimized longevity. It's so freaking, it's omnivores, it's plantivores, it's crap eaters, it's quality eaters. I think and then I'm challenged. I ignore that data, or do I throw all this anti-omega-3 supplementation backlash the last 10 years away and say, none of those studies measure blood levels. What am I going to do with a patient who's got inflammation, has some joint pain, C-reactive proteins up, lipids aren't optimal. They got, their pattern on their lipids is type B with a lot of small LDL and such. And, you supplement them with either food-based sources of omega-3 or algae-based sources of omega-3 or fish oil, high-quality-based sources, and you see their lab panel, really change dramatically, and I didn't have to use a drug. So I think there's a real undiscussed and unmet need to measure and supplement. But do we have the database that's going to allow that to happen? And pharmaceutical industry all of a sudden is really stoked up again about omega-3 because of a drug called Vascepa, a pretty expensive pure EPA play that if your triglycerides are up, they have an outcome study now. If your triglycerides, I think it was 250 to 500 with coronary disease, and we were put on, I think it's 4 grams of EPA. Wow. They saw a significant improvement in outcome in a study published about a year and a half ago. So it's a commercially available drug. So now there's drug reps out there teaching docs again about omega-3, but it's not based on measuring it. It's just routine use after a standard lipid panel with high triglycerides.
Yeah, I mean, the panels that you're doing that I ran through your office turned me on to reignited my passion for making sure that the EPA and DHA levels are where they need to be. And also another thing that's cool that I think you're bringing out there message-wise is the importance of calcium scores. Just people out there who are listening, just going and getting what their baseline levels are. And I want to throw you a super nerdy curveball because we have a super nerdy audience. Interleukin 16, IL-16. What that is a marker that comes up in arterial age scores. And the research that I've been able to find shows that it's mast cell mediated. What is the deal with that? And I think some of those plaques are more stable. Is that like a good type of plaque to have?
Stable plaque, that's a generic term, but it's an interesting. Just go back a little bit. There was a paper study published in 1995 by a Danish scientist of great renown, Dr. Falk, F-A-L-K, that if it's really cool and it just leads to hypothesis, you're having a heart attack today. We rush you to the cath lab. We inject dye down your arteries. We find that the middle of your left anterior descending artery is 100% blocked with a clot. And then presumably you put a wire, a balloon, and a stent, and you fix it. But we happen to find that you had a heart catheterization 4 months ago. So this was the study design. People that had today a big heart attack, but we happen to find the old heart cath. What severity was that artery 4 months, 5 months, 6 months ago? Well, this Dr. Falk was able to find about 250, 300 people. It's not a really good study as retrospective. 2/3 of the time, the site that is now 100% blocked was less than 50% blocked a month or 2 or 3 or 4 before.
Wait, say that again. Hold on, say that.
2/3 of the it wasn't a 90% blockage that 2 months later became 100%. That was 1/3 of the time. But the majority of you're having a heart attack today.
Wow.
You're Kevin Smith, the actor producer, and you're having a big heart attack. If we did a heart cath on you 2 months before, we wouldn't find a 90%.
Wow.
We'd find a 30% blockage.
Wow.
Leading to the idea that unstable plaque, like a volcano, like Mount Etna in Sicily. It sits quiet for a while, then it starts erupting. So that's where mast cell and white cell and the it's called the fibrous cap becomes thin, just like maybe the top of a volcano starts to thin out a bit because of some heat and activity underneath. That has been the theme of cardiology now since 1995, that inflammation. It led ultimately to a prospective study that was published in 2017 called CANTOS that took heart patients with a HSCRP of 2.0 or greater. And this is kind of getting close. They found a drug, an orphan drug, that's an interleukin 1B inhibitor, which is even upstream to interleukin 16. And they gave it sub-Q every 3 months to 10,000 people. It's an amazing prospective study, or placebo. The drug does only one thing. It lowers your C-reactive protein. It doesn't lower your lipids. So this Paul Ridker, a genius at Harvard, said, let's construct a study that isolates lipid lowering from inflammation lowering and see if it matters. And lo and behold, the patients that were randomized to the interleukin 1B, which is a way to lower C-reactive protein without lifestyle change, experienced less events over the course of 4 or 5 years. It proved the inflammation hypothesis of coronary disease, plaque rupture events. The drug is like $200,000 a year and has a side effect called sepsis. So it will never come to market in that role. It was followed quickly by another immune modulating trial similar with a drug called methotrexate used to treat rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis. That's very inexpensive. That trial wasn't positive. It was a big disappointment. So unfortunately, going back to really what we started with, you want to lower inflammation. We're talking lifestyle. We're talking,
sure.
We're talking sleep. We're talking weight loss. We're talking, jacking up antioxidants on whole foods and getting rid of metabolic endotoxemia and hyperprocessed high-fat foods. So interleukin-16, it is it is an interleukin, as I recall, that is not associated with inflammation. It's associated with plaque stability.
But you're still going to show up on a calcium score, though.
The end result. So, just in case, there's an amazing documentary I urge everybody to watch called The Widowmaker Movie on Netflix, which goes through the history of why is there a test that costs $75 at a local hospital, takes under a minute. You lie down, hold your breath, and you go home. You get a report. Your heart arteries are free of calcification, and calcification is known in the pathophysiology of atherosclerosis to be about 20 to 30% of the burden of plaque, but very easily identified in X-ray studies. Or you get a calcium score that's 50 or 100 or 400 or 1200 or 1600, which is a software algorithm that tells you how many pixels and how dense the calcium is in each pixel. And there's 2,000 studies that say calcium scores of 0 are nearly risk-free for 5 to 10 years from heart attack because you basically have no calcific plaque. And calcium scores that go up and up escalate risk and identify silent atherosclerosis. Why is that test not being promoted like colonoscopy and mammography and thermography and Cologuard and all the other things out there? Watch the documentary. I mean, it's sort of
what's it called again? The Widowmaker?
The Widowmaker movie. Yeah, it's sort of
movie.
A conspiracy theory. It's very dramatic because actually in the state of Texas, every citizen gets a free heart CT scan at age 50 because one legislator got so pissed off when he had a heart attack and found out he could have had a test a year before that could have clued him in that he had a silent problem. So I've been very aggressive. Test not guess is my kind of constant statement. You're 40, you're 45, you're 48, you got some risk factors or you're just interested. Go spend $75. Go get the amount of radiation that a mammogram is, which is considered low.
Absolutely.
And just get checked for the most serious and sudden life-altering or life-ending disease that still exists till we get our hands around it. So that's a calcium score. Will that represent the whole inflammatory cascade, the lipid hypothesis, other genetic markers? Yeah, lipoprotein A. You can't measure it individually, but it's the end result of all those factors: smoking, diet, blood sugar, the whole gamut.
Yeah, that's. I think that is a great message for people out there. Might as well get your calcium score. There is some radiation, but it gives you a big clue into the health of your arteries. But you touched on go ahead.
Big handful of chlorella about an hour before your X-ray exposure. When Fukushima exploded, and other things like that. There's some good data that the incredibly high phytonutrient chlorophyll, vitamin C, omega-3 content of I would do organic chlorophyll, 3, 4, 5, 6 grams of chlorophyll of chlorella, which is rich in chlorophyll, may actually prevent DNA breakage from radiation. So,
interesting.
When I fly,
what about airflow? Yeah, okay, yeah.
When I fly, I take 3, 4 grams of chlorella. I have some in my bag right here, and if I'm having an X-ray procedure, which is pretty rare, I would do the same. It sounds hokey, but one, there's no risk. Two, it's actually a food and an extremely high nutrient food. So the only side effect is you're actually getting a bolus of vitamin K2 and omega-3 and chlorophyll, antioxidant, power. I think it's the future of algae-based foods we haven't scratched the surface.
Big for the omega-3s for the plant-based community, and also the mold docs love chlorella because they use it as a binding agent for mycotoxin.
Right.
A lot of those guys, I don't know if it's part of the Shoemaker protocol, but some of these docs, they love it because they think it can sort of help to detox some of this stuff that people get when they have
mercury
dysbiosis.
too. Mercury, it's been shown to bind and exit mercury from the body, and you got to separate the woo from the science, but there's pretty good science to heavy metal toxicity, either prevention or extraction from the body with just eating chlorella.
And that's a great point. So this getting the supplement game going can be beneficial. We had a big episode on that last episode. I want to take a brief tour through a topic that's maybe a little less technical and a little more fun, which is vegan YouTube land. We touched on Ravana. We can kind of dive back into that, but I want to kind of pair that up with the Game Changers movie that's coming out. I love these plant-based movies. I think there is a little bit of the whole kind of Fox News, MSNBC thing, with some of these movies, but I think that they're good for people to watch because the overall message I think is positive. What the Health, you were in What the Health. Do you know what the deal is with Game Changers?
Oh man, it's a year overdue because of an incredible executive producer, James Wilkes, Lightning Wilkes, UFC fighter, plant-based, but I think he's a perfectionist. And if he's listening, I love you, James, but let's get that movie out.
Let's get the movie out. We want to see it.
I saw it a year ago, and apparently it was like version 7, and they wanted to get Lewis Hamilton, Formula F1 in, and they wanted to get the Tennessee Titans in, so they cut some people out, put some people in. But yeah, it will be, I would imagine it's the best funded plant-based documentary ever. It's certainly the best produced because it's James Cameron, who did Avatar and Titanic, I think the highest grossing producer alive. Or maybe Spielberg is, but between the two of them, they're neck and neck. So I've seen it. It's gorgeous. It's well done. And basically it goes through stories about plant-based athletes and their prowess and the improvement they had, either in performance, recovery, strength. But as you point out, there is a hilarious 7 or 8 minutes where they recruited 3 University of Southern California athletes. I think they were basketball kids, tall, good-looking kids. They put him in a lab with a urologist from L.A., Aaron Spitz, who he will become the world's most popular urologist when the movie finally comes out. As he said, he wishes his name was Swallow, not Spitz. He's a urologist. God. I know that's really gross, but
terrible.
Hey, Aaron, he's actually his claim to fame for now
that's
is
not good.
He's written a book called The Penis Book: How to Manage Your Tool by
and
Aaron Spitz.
You have a book you have a book that's came out before that, I believe, called Vegan Sex, right?
Right. Vegan Sex was largely a product of a well-known plant-based athlete, Ellen Jaffe Jones, who has competed in like 160 road races, and she's a warrior at age 62 or 63, and has written many books. So she approached me. I want to write the woman's perspective of finding a plant-based man, and how joyful that is to find a plant-based tool, to be very blunt. Yes. And she said, can you write some science chapters? So I contributed, and then there's some great recipes. It's a very inexpensive book. The recipes are worth the price of the book. But anyways, these 3 athletes, they find a old-fashioned urology tool called the rigid scan. But it's a ring you put around your male member, go to sleep, and every time...
It's like the Oura ring for your
it's like
junk.
the Oura ring for your for your nozzle, and your deep sleep and your stiff sleep and your hard sleep and your wide sleep and all the rest. So every time you have a nocturnal erection, it records it, and it can tell all kinds of parameters. Huh. It's an old machine. They found it. And they fed these athletes a meal 2 different days, about a week apart. One was a very meat-heavy meal, and one was on the second day, a whole food, plant-based, probably low in oil diet. I haven't seen the recipe. And the movie shows when they show the results to the athletes, because they were asleep. I mean, this stuff happens at night, particularly when you're 20, 21 years old,
right?
And all. And the difference was like 300, 400, 500% more erections, length of erections, duration of erections, width of erections. And when they showed the graphs, these guys just,
my God,
they just broke up in laughter and embarrassment. But it's 3 patients. It's not the world's biggest scientific study. Apparently, most of the crew on the movie went plant-based when those results came out. I'm pretty sure those 3 guys probably, at least before a date, went plant-based. So, if we could ever get that movie out, Lewis Hamilton is, you think about how his brain has to function second to second. And he says, I've never been sharper, better, stronger, in a car going 180 miles an hour around, hairpin curves. Pretty convincing stuff. I mean, you're not going to get a placebo effect at that level of precision.
No, that's a fascinating, I mean, that's one of the things I'd heard previous interviews with, I think it was Dean Ornish who talked about that, but that seems to be where the plant-based community wants to go. They want to go into this thing of, hey, this is what causes erectile dysfunction. Don't eat your chicken. You're screwed if you do. And then also this whole idea of vegan bodybuilders. And I think the vegan bodybuilders in particular is a little bit ironic because of the fact, and I love some of these vegan bodybuilders. They're hilarious. I follow some of their YouTube channels like Derek Simmet and John Venus and some of these guys.
A few guys here, Nime Delgado.
I've seen his stuff.
Just left him a minute ago.
Yeah, they're cool. They're cool guys, and they seem to, I don't know them personally, but I've seen their YouTube channels. The thing I think is sort of ironic about that is that, and I've heard you talk about this with Walter Longo and mTOR, and basically this whole idea that Walter Longo is telling us the inflammatory amino acids in these animal proteins cause a problem because they're anabolic and they stimulate mTOR. how can you have your cake and eat it too there? How can you be a bodybuilder and not stimulate mTOR? Like, how does that work?
Well, just pausing for a minute, because I don't think anybody who talks a lot about mTOR, and certainly you mentioned Peter Attia will bring it up commonly in his discussion, and he had David Sabatini, MD, on, who's often considered next to Walter Longo, some of the top experts. You don't want your mTOR abnormally high consistently, which you might be able to achieve with a diet high in the amino acids that are largely found in meat. I want to say isoleucine, valine, and leucine. And methionine might be there. There's other pathways. I think that diets high in methionine, which tend to be animal-based meat diets, accelerate aging. I don't actually know if that's through the mTOR pathway. But you don't necessarily want it low when you're a child, you want it jacked up because you're growing. So during the adult phase, do you want to create a lifestyle or diet that you're always low in mTOR activation and insulin-like growth factor 1? So there is this talk about cycling it, bring it down low for a while, which will turn off some pathways associated with disease and cell damage and senescence, and activate autophagy, and then go back and cycle it. So that is certainly the model that Longo has created in his 5-day fasting mimicking Prolon diet, that it may be enough to turn off, as if we can't measure it. We measured IGF-1 in his clinical studies. You can drop IGF-1 for a week on his program, and then when you return to your diet, you're probably going to allow it to drift back up, and you could do it again a month later. It may be of value to do that in terms of autophagy and cell repair and senescent prevention. There's so much we have to learn about that. So are these guys, are they activating mTOR? I mean, the amino acid component of plant-based meals is not identical to the amino acid component of meat-based meals. And I don't know a study, but I haven't searched it, of plant-based athletes, weightlifters, and IGF-1 levels. Most of these guys say they are not on anabolic steroids, they're not taking supplements. They're just eating large quantities of whole food. Certainly, I follow Nime Delgado, and he shows his diet. He's a very authentic human being. I'm absolutely certain he's a clean bodybuilder.
Yeah, he seems very cool. I've heard interviews he's done. I think he's the guy who grew up basically in like a Hare Krishna community. He's never even eaten meat in his life.
He's vegetarian the whole life, and vegan
great
for about 8 years. I think he's really authentic. The other thing is, this is careers for these people. It's their passion.
Yeah,
they obviously love it.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily longevity scientists. I hope it works out for all of them long term. Truly, the real scary is the other side, the paleo keto world of weightlifters. And, you had Harlequin, I'm blanking on his first name, very well known.
Peliquin.
Is it Peliquin? Yeah.
We're probably mispronouncing. Yeah, I saw
it was
that.
September 2018. It was 2 days before I went on the Joe Rogan show, and he drops dead of a heart attack at age 56, kind of the guru that they were following. I'd be concerned there about accelerating atherosclerosis or creating unstable plaques, or a variety of, dietary and maybe supplement-based. I don't know what he was using.
Yeah, as a layperson, I'm just kind of waiting for somebody to come out and give me what they think the new thinking on IGF-1 is. It seems like it's evolving. My job here, I feel like, is just to play a little bit of devil's advocate. I think those guys are healthy. I think they're fine. The concern I would have for them, if I were to identify one, is that they're getting enough DHA into the brain on a plant-based diet. I've learned a lot from following Derek Simmet, who's a vegan bodybuilder. He turned me onto this app called Chronometer. I don't know if you use Chronometer.
I'm familiar with
that
it
now. That is amazing.
But there are a number of people talking. It really helps them track their nutrient composition and such.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess we can close off with a little bit on Dr. Gundry. I know you've been very outspoken against the plant paradox diet. I mean, what's your take? Because we running a nutrition website, we do get people who seem to have sensitivity to lectin, and I have heard some people that have had some good stuff happen to them. I have a yoga teacher, very high integrity guy I did a yoga teacher training under in San Diego a few years ago. He claims that without some of the lectin avoidance protocols in that diet, again, this is talk about the Aaron Spitz study. This is very N=1. I get that. But he says, look, this helped me maintain my yoga practice. I mean, avoiding the lectins, it was very helpful for me.
Right. So, a blogger can write blogs they want, and a athlete can talk about their nutrition. But, Dr. Stephen Gundry was head of cardiac surgery at Loma Linda University for about 20 years. He was, until 2004, I think he was an active cardiac surgeon. He did some amazing transplant research. If you remember, baboon hearts being put in some
Brilliant
infants.
guy, yeah.
With a guy named, I think, Leonard Bailey, who just passed away in the last few weeks. Immune research. I mean, the guy has a reputation of being a scientist. Now, he shifted 15 years ago to become an anti-aging doc in Palm Springs and, massive practice. And that's okay too, but he carries that respect and title of being an established scientist. And here comes the plant paradox, because his patient, Big Ed, that couldn't lose weight and his joints hurt, and I forget the whole, N of one, just every doc in the world couldn't deal with it. And Dr. Gundry himself was some sort of vegan vegetarian and running, yet he was overweight. Mm-hmm. And between the two of them, they identified a theory that nobody else in the world has identified, except maybe Tom Brady during the season and right. his avoidance of deadly nightshades and all. Another well-known scientist, Tom Brady. But, it's an N of one you got to respect. But Gundry takes the MD degree and his Loma Linda experience and says, I've done research that shows that the anti-nutrients in many foods, but are concentrated in legumes, are driving inflammation. And by eliminating them, I have cured many, many people. And I've published the data. And I wrote my book, The Plant Paradox, to help so many people. Now, I don't know, because there is so little science. I'm not in any way denigrating anybody who says I either follow the plant paradox or on my own I just cut back on either deadly nightshades, Tom Brady, or legumes, and says they feel better. Great. I mean, I'm a doctor. You feel better. I'm happy. But do you make it a public policy for most people to follow? Do you write a book that has what foods to eat, and, on the foods not to eat is pretty much every legume, when almost all nutritional studies would identify peas, beans, and lentils as a public policy statement, a core, inexpensive, microbiome-friendly, cholesterol-lowering, protein-rich, fiber-rich group of foods. In reality, he's never published a paper on any of this stuff. He says he has, he hasn't. He published one abstract that's riddled with typographical errors, which is just absolutely embarrassing. It actually calls his protocol the plant paradox in a scientific abstract that he references as a conclusive data. Which you have a great YouTube video about, which people can check out. I made a little fun of it, because it's just embarrassing that with his capacity and his business and everything else, nobody noticed that there was a pretty comical typographical error. But finally, I identified Dr. Colin Campbell of the China study and his nutrition program identified that this is what's inexcusable. The book, The Plant Paradox, it sold millions of copies, New York Times bestseller for dozens a week, translated into 34 languages. If you open chapter 1, read the first paragraph, go to the reference 1, go to PubMed, it's not the right reference. It's a reference about cows, and he's talking about rats. And you go to chapter 2 and reference 4, and you do the same thing. You go through the book, you realize, the biggest paradox here is the science here is either the sloppiest science, intentionally fraudulent, or just incredibly sloppy. And more recently, and I encourage people to look up a scientist, PhD, Stephen Guyanet, Guyanet. He's on Twitter. He's got a website called Red Pen Reviews. They're taking books like this and they're doing very detailed statistical and science analysis. Very cool. So they judged that the references in the plant paradox were right 26% of the time, and 74% of the time they were just made up nonsense. Really?
So Red Pen Reviews. Is that
Reviews.
A website?
It's a website. There's about 10 books so far, including Grain Brain, including Wheat Belly.
What did they say about Grain Brain?
I mean, they all got D- scientific support. They actually have the longevity diet by Longo there. And I haven't read that whole review. It's like about 90% scientifically accurate. I'm surprised it's not higher than that, but it's a completely different ball of wax than you see with the plant paradox. I will tell you his new book, Gundry, Longevity Paradox, which all of a sudden eating beans is on the approved food list. Like, okay, I guess you changed your viewpoint, even though you didn't announce it to the public. Basically says never eat fruit. In fact, it specifically
says the fructose thing.
Yeah, never eat apples. Apples will shorten your lifespan. And if you look for the reference, 5 pages on the role of fruit and longevity as a life-shortening habit, there's not a reference in those. It looks like his habits haven't really improved. I actually talked to him personally. I mean, why don't you just get somebody to clean up your references and re-release the book? Because he said, it was a mistake. I had a Harvard student that did my references. Well, if that Harvard student screwed up, you have a responsibility to put out credible stuff. So the thing is, though, he's a steamroller. You can't stop Gundry right now. He's huge. He's everywhere.
Killing it. Yeah.
He's well-funded. He's making, more money than Johnson & Johnson out of this whole enterprise. And a few people feel better.
Mm-hmm.
Is he hurting anybody? I don't know. If nobody follows these diets long term. I mean, if you don't eat legumes for 3 months and then you give up, you probably didn't hurt yourself. But it's not authentic and honest.
I hear you. I know you're pressed for time. I do want to close out in the last couple minutes that we have here, and I want to just to speak to the ex-vegan thing, the ex-vegan YouTube thing, because my sense of things is you have these people, we touched on them a few minutes ago, you have these people, they go on a plant-based diet for 6 years. You've talked about this. They're cutting back on water consumption. They're helping the environment. They're doing all the things that the vegan community wanted them to do. And then they're caught, and I get it. It's a betrayal of trust. I get that. I do. But look, these people are like part of the tribe and they're cast out so quickly. And I feel like there needs to be a way for the vegan community to continue to embrace these people because they're basically like 99.9% plant-based. So what do we do about the ex-vegan? What's your take on the ex-vegan thing?
So, number one, you're not seeing vegan physicians and scientists. And again, if you're a scientist, it's what Dr. Garth Davis, some of you may know him from the book Proteinaholic, and he's pretty out there on social media, a bariatric surgeon, Asheville, North Carolina, says, he goes, I'm not pro-vegan to only show the science that supports pro-vegan. He goes, I picked a vegan diet because I read the science, and I studied the science as a bariatric surgeon concerned about nutrition, and it took me to age 45, but I adopted a whole food plant-based diet because of the science. I don't have an axe to grind. I feel similarly, and I says, when data comes out that a grass-fed beef and butter diet will reverse coronary disease and prevent disability and death, I will present to my patients that an option could be, a new, but I'm making up a hypothetical statement here because there is no such data at the present time, and I doubt there ever will be. You have to be authentic and honest with your patients, or if you're a scientist, with the science. So I haven't seen any plant-based scientist, plant-based physician, plant-based academician announce I've given up. I mean, I'm frustrated. I tried it and I'm going back to either studying the benefits of meat or adopting meat. All you see are clickbait YouTubers. And I don't know that all of this, if I were Ravana, all of a sudden I got 10 billion more views. I'm not saying it was authentic or managed. I think some of that
a real politic kind of a thinking.
She broke out of the pack and got more followers and probably sold more food guides. Now she can sell food guides to vegans and non-vegans. I think it's all a waste of energy and time. It sure provides fodder for other YouTubers and other bloggers, and it causes, some people have commented that there was a more recent YouTuber that in the last 2 weeks also bailed out of the system, and somebody counted there's been like 25 of them this year that have pretty big numbers on YouTube and have announced they've given up. Is it authentic? Is it not authentic? But some have said, and I'm not trying to be gender specific, but some of these were probably dysmorphic, body shaming diet followers that are very low calorie,
water fasting,
and salads, and not, nobody was counseling on them on what's a whole food plant-based, food plate that physician committee responsible medicine might talk about, let alone being sure they got enough omega-3 precursors or B12. I mean, who knows what these people are doing? Is it a big teaching point? I will say nobody on the planet knows if you took 1,000 people, put them all on a really healthy whole food plant-based diet, would 1,000 have optimal labs and health? Or is somebody going to seem to do better with, some wild-caught salmon or some grass-fed beef or some, Kerry Gold butter out of Ireland or something? We don't know the answer to that. I suspect most of those 1,000 would thrive on, if you just provided them meals that were beautiful and organic and well constructed. But is it 900 of 1,000? Is it 998 of 1,000? Is your microbiome or your genetic influence, your specialty? If you're, ApoE3, do you need more fat content in your diet than the ApoE4, and you have to create a little different diet for people based on their genetics. That's, again, I know you're going down that path, and I'm actually think we will tailor diets for sure to genetic profiling for sure.
What we're seeing is that there's certain variants in some of these genes that make it more difficult to convert alpha-linoleic acid, which is the plant-based omega-3 fat, into EPA and DHA. When I see people, and you can look at the studies, a lot of the blogs out there and some of the more partisan vegan YouTube channels will tell you, well, it's like 3% conversion of ALA to EPA and DHA. Right. I think the conversion from ALA to EPA is pretty robust in most people, but the conversion from ALA to DHA is actually in some studies show it's like minuscule or non-existent. So my concern for some of these people that go on these vegan diets, you have people like you guys are, and the doctors that that are at these conferences, you guys are just a wealth of knowledge. You know this stuff inside and out. You know the micronutrients inside and out. You're taking chlorella before flights, but you have these kids who are out there, and they might not know they need to be taking algal oil, and they might be massively deficient in DHA, and they might feel anxious or depressed as a result. So that's when I see the
vitamin,
fish.
Vitamin D levels of 10. I mean, the whole thing. It's very possible. On that topic, I'll just tell you, some of your listeners might enjoy finding an online doctor, Brooke Goldner, Goldner, MD, psychiatrist in Houston, a woman, contracted lupus at age 15, and a rather severe form of lupus at age 25, was on the verge of dialysis, adopted a whole food plant-based diet and modified it so that she jacked up precursors to omega-3. I mean, literally, a pound of hemp hearts and flaxseed and chia seeds, eliminated all oils, big giant green smoothies, lots of hydration, and such, and was cured of lupus. All her labs have been published, and now counsels people on autoimmune disease. But she makes the point, you will convert more ALA to omega-3 fatty acids if your oil and omega-6 content from oils is kept very low or minimal, because they compete for the same pathway. So that may be why that plant-based diet rich in oils, processed oils particularly, which is going to be what most people are eating, kind of junky, available plant-based foods that are out there right now, may leave you particularly apt to be deficient in omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah. And Aaron, our geneticist, has told me that the studies that were done on, to your point, linoleic acid converting to arachidonic acid in people, they used to think that it was like 2 to 3% of the linoleic acid omega-6 count that you ate would convert to arachidonic acid downstream. Those were all studies that were done in Caucasians. Now what the research is showing is that I actually carry one of these variants that hyperconverts linoleic acid to arachidonic acid, but it's more common in African American and Mexican populations. Wow. And so that's what the point you just made is very well taken for certain populations who might not know that when you're eating the vegetable oil, it's getting into this inflammatory stuff at a higher rate than the arachidonic acid, some of the bad stuff we talked about. So it's and I'll just say one more thing. There is a split amongst those plant-based doctors that are on the web or doing blogs or writing YouTubes or articles. There are some that firmly believe the only supplement you might consider is vitamin B12 and you're done. And then there are those that will extend the list to perhaps vitamin D, to algal oil or omega-3 algae capsules. Some will include a little bit of iodine, either from sea vegetables or as a supplement, some taurine. So there are now some commercially available multivites, by vegans, for vegans. Sounds like Irish Spring. But nonetheless, that are trying to, in one-stop shop supplementation, fill a few holes that could exist in some people, could explain some of the YouTubers. Would Ravana feel better with her diet? And something called Complement Plus, which is a multivitamin for vegans that's out now from Matt Frazier, a pretty well-known athlete. The unknown answer, but it makes sense to me to say take the best of the whole food plant-based diet, recognize the science says there still could be some nutritional deficiencies, but God knows you could point your finger the other way at a heavy meat diet and come up with the same deficiencies. But we've got a, one-stop shop to plug it. Here's a couple simple capsules a day and you're done. And that's what I teach in my practice. Plants plus, I call it, best diet with intelligent supplementation, either just shotgun approach or do lab work and tailor it based on the lab work. Awesome. Well, Dr. Khan, this has been a very fun conversation. We really appreciate you coming down to this part of the city. It's a real honor to have you on the podcast. And
dude, you're like Detroit's brightest brain moved to New York.
But, I don't know about that, but
thank you. I really appreciate it.
We'll see you at home.
Absolutely. Thank you,
sir. Bye-bye. The Gene Food Podcast is our attempt to synthesize the latest developments in the fields of genetics, nutrition, and medicine, and offer you practical tips and stories you can use in your own unique health journey. If you enjoy this podcast, you can find more information online at mygenefood.com.